Good morning. My name's Claudia Campbell, and I'm a native of downtown Tensall, Alabama. And I'm privileged today to give you a little bit of our local history and to talk about my family. My mother and father were June and Carl Slaughter. Mama grew up in Mobile and met my dad at Spring Hill College and at the old Marine Hospital in Mobile, and they married and moved here right after the war. So she's almost a native of Tensall too. Daddy's family had been here for many, many generations, and they came here, Captain Joseph Booth and Colonel Lee Slaughter, in response to the attack on Fort Mims. So we have a great deal of family history that is fun, exciting, and continues on back into the late 1700s and early 1800s. I'm the youngest of 5 children. June Iris, Marilyn, Morton, and Beth were my older brother and sisters. And we had a great time growing up in Tensall. There were plenty of things for us to do, living out in the country. We went to the creek a lot, and our cousins who lived just down the road, Pete, Billy, Bobby, and Joe, were just like brothers. And so we had our own baseball team. We would ride our bicycles occasionally down to the creek and have a great time. I learned to swim in Majors Creek and have loved the water ever since. So living in the country has its great benefits. You felt close to the others around you, and lots of cousins and aunts and uncles who were nearby and who came to visit. So country life is just wonderful. My nickname is Toogie, and when I was born, my older sister was with my mother's mother, Nano, and they had named me a really long name, Claudia Louise. And so June Iris and Nano decided that would be pretty hard to say. So since I was named after my 2 grandmothers, 2 G's, they named me Toogie. And until I was 6 years old and headed to school, I had no idea I had another name. So the night before school, my mother said, "Honey, let's sit down. You're going to school tomorrow," which I laugh about now. I didn't know my letters or anything. So we wrote out C-L-A-U-D-I-A. And I said, "So this spells Toogie?" And she said, "Honey, no, it spells Claudia. That's your name." And I remember feeling faint. I just couldn't believe I had another name like that. And she said, "Well, it's your grandmother's name." And I remember being very pale and saying, "But her name is Grandmama." Living out in the country, going to school was quite a big to-do. It's about 12 miles to Stockton, and I attended Stockton Junior High School. I was just 6. We didn't have kindergarten then. And so riding the bus with my older siblings and with my cousins was always a lot of fun, or so I thought then. It was a long ride, but Stockton Junior High School was just wonderful to me. The teachers were from the local area, and they really made sure that they got us plenty to do, and we had plays in the school. I remember once in Miss Galls's room, it was the 5th grade, and I was a leprechaun in a play. So we had drama along with history and English, art and math. So I enjoyed that totally. After the 9th grade and graduation there, I went to Baldwin County High School and totally enjoyed that. I was a cheerleader in high school and a favorite in Key Club, and I got to do several fun things, from learning Spanish and being the señorita in the homecoming parade. So that was just a fun thing for me. High school was a lot of fun. And then later I went on to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa for 2 years and transferred to UAB, where I became a nurse. I was actually headed to physical therapy school, and my advisor said, "You have to go to nursing school first." And so I agreed, okay, that'll be great. My mother was a nurse, my sister was a nurse. We've had nurses for generations, so I became a nurse and enjoyed that for over 40 years. I was born in Tensas in the house my great-grandfather built. His name was Howell William Slaughter, and that home was built on the Booth plantation. My great-great-great-grandfather, Captain Joseph Booth, came to this area in response to the tragedy at Fort Mims. And so he was a proponent of staying in the Union when the Civil War came along in the 1860s, and he voted against secession from the Union. But when the Yankees came through after the battle at Blakely, they burned several houses and homes along the way, and the old Booth plantation was one of those. One of his grandsons, Joseph Booth, also was his name, and he loaded, and everyone there loaded up the wagons and moved them down the river and crossed where Mims Ferry had been over to Nanahubba Island to save all the things that they could possibly save. And unfortunately, the Yankees burned the house when they had returned. But 2 generations later, Colonel Lee Slaughter, my other great-great-great-grandfather who came in response to Fort Mims, who was a quartermaster at Montpelier, his grandson married Captain Booth's granddaughter. And so they bought the old Booth plantation and built the home that I now live in. It was built in 1890. It's a great old home. It's plenty cold in the winter and plenty warm in the summer, but I love it dearly. So I even have the same bed that my Smith grandmother brought into the family. So that's quite a treasure for our entire family, and the cradle that all the babies have rocked in. Some other, I think, important family history is the fact that we still have, I don't claim it as my own, but as my family, it's a christening gown that was made by my great-grandmother, Eliza Belt Slaughter, and her daughters, Hattie and Miriam. And it is beautiful, and I've had the pictures of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren made in that beautiful outfit. It's just a wonderful family treasure. One of the most interesting things in this old home is the portrait of Captain Joseph Booth, and it was returned to Tensas and to the Booth and Slaughter family after the war between the states. And it hangs in the hall of the home I live in now, and it's quite a treasure. I have people who frequently call and say, have you heard of Captain Joseph Booth? And I'm always excited to have family members, even 200 years ago, that we were kin, who are related to Captain Booth or Colonel Slaughter, to call and say, could you show us his grave, or do you know anything about him? So it's pretty fun to have some of these treasures and be able to show other people just what kind of wonderful family history that we have. I want to tell you a little more about my family history. We're here at Fort Mims today, and my history goes back to there. My great-great-great-great-grandfather, Jesse Embry, lived over in Monroe County, or over in Washington County, and he was a millwright. He built a lot of the grist mills around, and his son-in-law, Reese Smith, assisted him. And during the Creek Uprising of 1813, they were building the mill down in Stockton near the Bicentennial Park right now. And because of the Indian warning, they decided to leave that area. And Reese Smith and his wife, Matilda, and 2 children came to Fort Mims by canoe. They thought they would find some refuge here, but when they came, they decided that it didn't look as good as they had hoped it would. And so they packed up and got in the canoe and went south. Another ancestor, again on my Smith side of the family, were the Bates, and great-great-great-grandfather Bates and his wife were here in Fort Mims, and the family tales are that he survived and she died. Then in response to this horrific tragedy here at Fort Mims, Andrew Jackson and the troops came south. And among those were 2 of my great-great-great-grandfathers, Captain Joseph Booth and Colonel Lee Slaughter. Captain Booth was in the cavalry, and he went to Pensacola, escorted Claiborne around into Escambia, Clark counties, and on down to Mobile. During that time, the officer who had more rank than he was elevated to another position, and from captain on up, and then Captain Booth was given that honor to be the new rank, Captain Joseph Booth. He came down here from Marlboro District, South Carolina, when he was only 17, and he went on to fight in the Mississippi Dragoons in the Battle of New Orleans. Then he came back here and asked for land for his payment for service, and he acquired the property, quite a large amount of property, from near Highway 59, present Highway 59, all the way to the river. He was very active around the county, and whenever the Second Creek War broke out in 1830s, his mounted cavalry group, Booth's Cavalry, was re-enlisted, and they were able to move forward and fought the Creeks during that time. My other ancestor, Colonel Lee Slaughter, also a great-great-great-grandfather, was a quartermaster at Montpelier, and that is where Andrew Jackson and the troops had encamped. Lee Slaughter asked for that property as his payment for service and came back and married the beautiful Mary Harris. Sounds like a wonderful love story. And they had quite a large family. Unfortunately, he died at an early age. So Mary and her children moved to several different locations, the last being near Montgomery Hill Baptist Church. After the tragedy at Fort Mims on August 30th, 1813, quite a few years passed by, 15 or 20 years, and there was a Union church. It was down on Holly Creek, and the Methodist and the Baptist were there. And Captain Booth's wife and a Mrs. Stedham, whose family had survived Fort Mims, decided they needed to have a Baptist church. And so Eliza Booth Belt and her husband, Dr. Thomas Wright Belt, also my great-great-grandparents, gave the property for Montgomery Hill Baptist Church. That was organized in 1840, and the church building was built in 1854. It is a beautiful structure and is well maintained today, and everyone in Baldwin County should come and see this oldest Baptist church in the county, maybe the oldest church in the county. Just down the road is a home that is the oldest in the county, and that belonged to David Mims, the brother of Samuel Mims, and the family who lives there now is the Warren family, and they maintain that beautifully. Having lived in Baldwin County most all my life except during college and for a few years afterward, I never knew another way of life. When you live out in the country, you have to get ready early or always be late. So I think I've hopefully overcome that obstacle of always being late, but we have to learn to leave early. And it's always just been a joy to ride through our beautiful countryside that has remained very rural and beautiful. And I think all our people here have quite a great relationship. They work to be good and kind to each other. I worked in Baldwin County for many years as a registered nurse, and again, my mother graduated from Charity Hospital in New Orleans, my sister Marilyn from Mobile Infirmary, my sister Beth from Jeff Davis. I graduated from UAB, my daughter graduated from Mobile College, and my granddaughter graduated from University of South Alabama. So the nurses in our family are quite numerous, even in my brother's family and my sister's family also. So working in Baldwin County has been a pleasure. When you take care of family members or people that you know their brothers, sisters, or aunts or uncles, it makes you have quite a close relationship with them, and it's just always been such a pleasure to try to help people become more comfortable or get through a hard time when there's an injury or surgery or some sort of illness. So it's been my pleasure in life to have been a nurse. I think once a nurse, always a nurse. Some of the colorful figures that were up here in the Tensas country, which was then the Mississippi Territory, include Captain Booth. I told you a little about him. I found an old paper that was written by a friend who said Captain Booth was on on his horse, and he had his whole unit with him, and another captain had his unit ahead of him, and they stopped at the creek to get some water. And after a certain length of time, Captain Booth very nicely urged him to move on so his troops would be able to get some water. And apparently the retort from the other captain was not that nice. So Captain Booth drew his sword, as did the other officer, and they proceeded to have a sword fight in the middle of all their men were around. So the men apparently broke them up so that they could move forward, and Captain Booth's troops got their water, and I guess that was the end of that. But I think he was quite a colorful and courageous and spicy gentleman who stood up for what he thought was right. Another amazing figure here would be Samuel Mims. At this site is where his plantation was, and he came in the 1790s, very early to this country, and he was quite an entrepreneur because the wagons couldn't cross the delta down in the lower end of the county. This was about the last place they could cross the rivers. So he built a ferry crossing the Alabama River, and it's just down here, not even a mile away. And that was rediscovered by Dr. Wazelkoff, and my cousins and I happened to be there. It was a place that the earth is wallowed out, and wagons could easily enter onto the ferry. So it made it so interesting to see how he used the lay of the land to be able to transport troops and wagons and people with their belongings across to Nanahubba Island, and then they would move on forward to the next ferry over on the Tombigbee River. Two important characters were the Pierce brothers, and just down Boatyard Lake, they had a mill, they were the postmasters, and they also had the first school, public school in Alabama. And people of all races, that would be Europeans, or the white settlers coming in, the Indians, and those of mixed heritage were going to school there. As a child, my grandmother told me that William Weatherford came by canoe down the Alabama up Boatyard Lake to be a part of Pierce's school and mill. And all those little stories continue to tie in the settlers who were here for 3 generations, with children and grandchildren, when the Red Stick Creeks attacked Fort Mims, and there were people that they were all kin to inside and out. It makes it even more tragic to those of us who look at it now with a different perspective. There are many important lessons that we all learn in life. At 17, when my dad passed away, it was quite a shock to our whole family. His brother had died just a few years before, and all of his sons leaned on my father too, and we felt like they were brothers. And then when my daddy passed away, and my grandmother and mother were just grief-stricken as we were, it just makes you realize how important your relationships are. And it changed my thought process of trying to reach out to people and be kind and good and not mean and hateful, and just to say good things and acknowledge what people do. That makes a big difference in lives. Maybe that's what made me enjoy nursing so much. Some of the important things in my life that I can remember besides, first off are my children. My daughter Kelly, who's a nurse, my son Forrest, who did a lot of the work here at Fort Mims, worked on the stockade and all the fences, and he was a builder. And my son Aaron, who is a graduate of business school and works as a national representative for a fire extinguisher business. And I have 5 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren, and so my life is very busy. When I look back on some fun and interesting things though, I think of, besides my family, God and your family are always first. And then come some other things. When my cousin R.L. Smith, who was a past superintendent of education, he was a World War II veteran. And when the honor flights were going, I was so privileged to get to go on that honor flight with him and several more from Baldwin County. It just meant so much to go there and watch him see the monument that had been built to the World War II veterans. That was just so touching. And then it was just a tearful moment when he saw the Korean War monument with all the faces that when you moved your position, a different face came up on that, and soldiers that were made of bronze standing there with their equipment on and rain gear. I guess it rained so much in Korea. And those were just touching moments. And seeing the change of the guard at Arlington, it was just an amazing experience for that to happen. And here locally, one of my proudest moments is the blockhouse. And that was given to Fort Mims Restoration Association by one of our reenactors, Charles Masulia, whose mother was in a DAR chapter over in Georgia, and Lumpkin, Georgia. And he called one December knowing that we were trying to get a blockhouse here at Fort Mims and said, "Hey Claudia, how would you like a blockhouse for Christmas?" And so amidst all the jumping up and down and screaming, he said that this one was available. And so after receiving permission from the Alabama Historic Commission, personally we raised $30,000 to have this blockhouse moved to this site. It was marked and piece by piece, wheelers, and put in place before the 200th anniversary on August 30th of 2013. That was an amazing time, and to have the stockade, our beautiful monuments here, that for the first time in 200 years, we were able to recognize 237 names. That's all out of 400 plus who may have died at this site. We have families who continue to say, "Hey, my family said they were at Fort Mims." And so this drama is still unfolding 200 years later. So Fort Mims has been a family project since my dad was out plowing the ground around here looking for potatoes, plowing up potatoes. And again, number 5 and the kids, we were supposed to run behind and pick up potatoes. And instead, we got interested in pieces of pottery and sharp pointy rocks, which we found out were arrowheads. So Mama gave us mayonnaise jars and we all filled them up and we had our treasures. And I guess she was in a DAR chapter in Mobile, and I guess some light bulb came on and she thought, this has to be where Fort Mims is. It had been long abandoned and forgotten. The land was plowed around here. And so she contacted Mr. Marks from the Parks and Conservation Department in Montgomery, and they came here and in the 50s and began excavating. And they first started with having my dad come with a bulldozer. And he lightly scraped over the ground, and you could see the charred remains of the exterior of the fort. Again, I was just little, but I do remember how exciting it was then. And then every summer and every fall, it seemed that another crew was down here. And even up to a couple of years ago when Dr. Wazelkoff from USA was bringing his archaeology students here. And the last excavation, about this far down, one of the students found a silver medallion. It had been hammered out, and when you turned it over, there were teardrop clear stones on there. And we have a Facebook page, Fort Mims is on Facebook, and I put that picture on there, and everybody, including me, said, "Oh, that could have been my great-great-great-grandmother's, a beautiful brooch." So there's a lot still to be learned here, and we need the support of everyone who is just interested in history, local history here in the Tensas country. It used to be called Montgomery Hill, and also in all of Baldwin County. After Fort Mims was attacked and burned, there was hardly anything left, and the troops from Fort Stoddard came up and buried all those bodies that were left. And then when Jackson and the troops arrived, Fort Montgomery, only 3 miles away near Highway 59, was built. And that fort had cannons in it. Imagine that, the federal troops are riding through Tensas in units and going up and down through these woods, which is pretty exciting. It also had the first hospital in this area. So I think that was pretty exciting. Several years ago that was excavated and boxes of rifles and other artifacts were removed, and some were sent to Bruton and to the junior college there, and others were taken to Fort Toulouse up in Wetumpka. There's so many things that would be exciting to do, and one thing that I would like to do here at Fort Mims is to have a real museum. We have a small building here, and artifacts are shown by the Alabama Historical Commission every year. We have that display during our annual event the last weekend in August. But I think if we were able to get the funding to build the Samuel Mims home back and have that as a museum and bring our artifacts that are in other places all over the state back to our site, it would mean an awful lot to those descendants of Fort Mims, Indian and settler descendants, to be able to see what has been excavated and recovered at this site. During our 200th anniversary, they brought back the well casings. As a child, I saw those being removed from one of the wells, and it was a large oak tree that it was hollow, and when they brought it back, I was just very tearful. It just seems like it should be here, just like all our artifacts. So I'm in hopes that through work of many people and financial backing that we may one day have a real museum here at Fort Mims that many people can come and learn about their heritage. There is so much history in Baldwin County. I've only told you a small portion just about my family, but there are so many families around this area whose heritage goes back to Fort Mims and some before. So Baldwin County, not just the Tensas area in North Baldwin, but the entire county is so filled with amazing history. I hope you've enjoyed today. I hope you will look into your area history and your family history and pass it down to your children and grandchildren. If you don't talk to them, they will never know. So please share that with them. I also want to say what an amazing county commission we have. They are behind every project, including this at Fort Mims. They keep the Fort Mims looking beautiful. They assist me with our event every year, and they work hard all over the county. Another important project is the Baldwin County Historic Development Commission, and there is a marker program going on. This is in the midst of the Alabama Bicentennial, and we are working to put markers all over the county. These will be remarkable to teach your children and your grandchildren and the next few generations of what we have here in Baldwin County, Alabama. It's a wonderful place to be and a wonderful place to live. Thanks so much.